Welcome and good evening, everyone. Welcome to ASPN's March Madness debates. We are so excited you've joined us this evening. We're going to give everyone just a minute and to be able to log on, and then we will go ahead and start right on time. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We will start in just 1 minute. Good evening and welcome to those of you just joining us for the ASPN March Madness debates. We are so excited you've joined us this evening. We will begin the webinar in just about another 30 seconds to give a few more people time to log on. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to ASPN's March Madness of debates. We will start in just 1 moment. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March Madness debates brought to you by ASPN. I'd like to introduce our moderators for the evening, Drs. Timothy Deer and Dr. Dawood Syed. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight for our March Madness debates. Tim, good evening. How are you doing?
Doing great, Dawood. Good to see you.
You had a little March Madness yourself. How are you feeling after that Ironman Puerto Rico?
You know, Puerto Rico is a wonderful place, and it was a great race. And the wind, the humidity, the heat, I tell you, it makes you know it's spring. I feel great.
Well, I'm glad you got through there and had a really good time, and we're safe, so that's very important. So today we're going to go through, about four or five interesting debates on a variety of topics, going from minimally invasive spine to neuromodulation to practice building and recent CDC guidelines. So I think it's a pretty interesting agenda. It's pretty diverse, and I think in the spirit of March Madness, it wouldn't be without me giving a shout out to the Kansas Jayhawks, who are back in the Sweet 16. So we're going to try to carry the torch for the Big 12, Tim Deer, since West Virginia had a little bit of an off year this year.
Well, we're going to root for Kansas, not being there ourselves this year, so we have to root for the Big 12 brother and sisters. So here we go, root for Kansas. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks. All right, well, let's have our first two moderators, or first two debaters hit the scene here.
Yeah, our goal tonight is to have a really good discussion about each of these topics, and we'll be done right on time. And I think it's going to be a great time for discussion. So, Dawood, I'm going to give this first session over to you to moderate. So I'll step off.
Great. Well, these two gentlemen really don't need much of an introduction. Good friends of mine, and really stalwarts and luminaries in the field. I have Dr. Corey Hunter, who's private practice physiatrist in New York City, who I did my fellowship with about 11 years ago at New York. And then also someone that I've gotten to know very well over the last couple of years, neurosurgeon Dr. Jeffrey Henn, who practices out of Florida. And both of these gentlemen have done a lot of work in the last few years around sacroiliac joint disorders, and specifically surgical approaches to this. So we're going to have a pretty interesting debate, or different perspectives, really more, it should be the word, on, as a physiatrist and as a neurosurgeon, what they really look at when they're trying to treat patients with sacroiliac joint instability. There's been a lot of noise and things made over the last few months, I guess maybe even year, about kind of what's the appropriate way to transfix the sacroiliac joint. It's not a fusion. So we'll probably approach that subject and topic a little bit today as well. So right now we'll give the floor to Dr. Henn to start us off.
Thanks, Dawood. First slide, please. So I was asked to talk about, or at least think about, the concept of what does it mean to fuse, or in this case, the word transfix a joint. So I started, asking the question, what does it mean to do a fusion? Why do we do fusions? What's the goal, and what happens if it doesn't work? And then specifically this horrible word transfix, that has come to become a big part of our lexicon. So what does it mean to transfix something? Does it mean to pierce it, or does it just mean to make it not move? And if it does mean to pierce it, is that something you need to do, or is it even a good idea? So wanted to talk about that a little bit. Next slide, please. So what's the point of an SI fusion? Why do we even do it? And it's worth thinking about these ideas. So obviously you've got an inflammatory condition, usually sacroiliitis, and that can be incredibly painful. And what we now know that SI fusion is a way to permanently stop that motion, and ultimately has proven to be the most durable way to treat sacroiliitis. And the reason it's durable is because once it fuses, there are no moving parts, and essentially there's no reason for inflammation. Next slide, please. So if we want something to fuse, what do we do to get it to fuse? Well, bottom line, we need to have the right materials. And we talk about osteoconductive, the scaffolding, osteogenic, the actual cells, and then osteoinductive, essentially the inducing system that causes the cells to do what they're supposed to do. But also it's very important that it be mechanically stable. If you want something to fuse, you need to stop it from moving. Otherwise it doesn't tend to fuse. And what happens if it doesn't fuse? Well, there's a risk of recurrent motion inflammation. We call that a pseudoarthrosis or a non-union, and recurrent sacroiliitis. So that's why that's an important goal. Next slide. So briefly, I will point out that the Paintech LinQ implant essentially is designed specifically to accomplish all of that. Cortical bone combined with demineralized bone matrix so that you get your osteoconductive component, the cortical bone, as well as the osteoinductive. And the way that the decorticator actually essentially prepares both the iliac and sacral bone, you get some local blood products and ultimately creates a transfixion. You're linking one thing to the other and ultimately setting up perfectly for fusion. And next slide, please. And so how is that accomplished? Well, so the Paintech LinQ system, it does a few things that make sense. It's a large implant, which obviously that makes for a stable situation. It's rectangular. So some of the other systems out there use a round system. And of course, if you're trying to get something to not move, it's a lot easier to do that with a rectangular system and a large rectangular system. And so ideally it should also be hollow. You need a space for the bone to fuse. So the system is kind of set up to do everything you want it to do to get a fusion. I'll hand it over to Corey at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Hand. Corey, Jeff really provided us a nice framework for kind of the surgical perspective of achieving fusion. You kind of want to give us your take on this whole theory?
Sure. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this is a diagram of the SI joint. So the SI joint in a healthy individual is meant to move 2 to 4 millimeters. When it starts to move in excess of that is when you start to get this, you get the friction, and then you'll get basically sacroiliitis. So that's where, as Jeff was mentioning, the most durable way to fix this is actually to fix the excess motion. So when you look at where, if you look at it from a side angle, that the bottom left, that's the part that articulates with the ilium. That's the part that we're trying to actually affect. So people come at it from laterally, they come at it from oblique, they come at it from posterior, but the whole idea is to prevent that excess motion. So where, if you think of a philosophical term, Occam's razor, where the simplest solution is the most correct one. If it's moving too much, reduce that motion by doing the least amount possible. So when you have like a single point distraction system, you're actually just, people have heard me say this before, think of it like a seesaw that's creaking because it's making too much noise because the screw is loose. So you don't just, weld the whole thing shut, you tighten the screw down. And that's what this does, is it keeps that natural, symbiosis between the two sides. Next slide, please. Now, again, as Jeff was mentioning, this word transfix is really annoying because it's something that was just made up. It's not really like an actual, real thing that we talk about when we say like, oh, did I transfix it? I mean, yes, you did. But again, this is something that's just like a made up term that's used to kind of promote like one particular platform over another. But what does it mean? Trans is across and fix is fix. So you're just any of these platforms that actually will fuse one side to the other that are coming across it. I mean, the only way to fuse the joint is you have to come across both sides. So in essence, any of them that do that are going to transfix it. So I hope that kind of addresses that little bit of controversy that I think that people have been talking about for the last couple of weeks or a couple of months, to Dawood's point. And the last slide, please. And this is a comparative study that Dawood, Kaz, and I did, where we were looking. So one of the ideas that I had is that if we want to make the actual case that this does fuse the joint, we have to, instead of just looking at outcomes from patients, which we know patients are getting better from this, that's not a doubt, but does it do what it sets out to do? So we did a study comparing the motion of the joint artificially, the same way that SI-BONE had done this when in their initial studies way back when. We used the same lab and we looked at it. And what we found was, as you can see in the different positions that are referenced here, which would be intact, unilateral, and lateral. So the leftmost column in each one is an intact joint, and then the middle is unilateral and then bilateral. And then we're comparing it to a lateral fusion system and a posterior fusion, posterior being the darker blue on the left of the two columns and lateral being the right one. So you can see that they both achieve statistical significance and reduction in both. And you can see that the actual efficacy of the amount that it reduces the motion of the sacroiliac joint is comparable. So some that it's better, some of the other one's better. But the point is that you don't have to stick 3 giant dowels into a joint to accomplish the same thing as like what one large rectangular distracting device will do posteriorly. So again, as I mentioned, Alcom's razor, the simplest solution is the most correct one. If you can achieve the same results with one single fixation point, there's no reason not to do that first.
Great job, Dr. Hunter. I think I'm going to open it up for maybe, there may not be much of rebuttals. You guys are kind of on the same page with this, so I may ask a couple questions here. Jeff, so I've, as we've got this biomechanical work out there and things, sometimes there's skeptics, and they're like, how is this even possible? How can 3 kind of pretty robust implants coming in from laterally have equivalent biomechanical data to something that's just a single implant in the middle of the joint? What's your kind of theory around that?
Yeah, it's something that obviously we all put a lot of thought into. I think there are 2 answers. The simple one is what obviously Corey just did a beautiful job showing, is that in the end, sometimes things just work, and now we have to figure out exactly how is that possible. And so how is that possible? Well, clearly it looks more impressive to have 3 metal dowels going through and across a joint, but you have to remember every one of those dowels is essentially creating a bunch of fractures. In a sense, it has to pierce through the sacrum and then pierce back through the ilium. And so those are all effectively locations that can be stress risers and everything else. So while it looks very impressive, arguably it's actually ignoring the fundamental biomechanics of the joint itself. And that's the elegance of the whole idea, that if you actually take advantage of an incredibly robust ligamentous system that unfortunately through the pathologic process has become lax, all we're really doing is recreating that tension. And it's remarkable how you can generate such a essentially mechanically stable construct just using what the body already provided. And the bottom line, the proof is in the pudding. Corey just showed the data. That's the beauty of data. At the end of the day, no matter what a picture looks like, it shows that we've accomplished the mission with that system. So.
Well, I have one quick question for both of you, and we have about a minute left, so maybe 30 seconds each. But about 1.5 years ago, and Jeff, I'm not sure if you were on that debate or not. John Rafanos, a great colleague of mine here in West Virginia, neurosurgeon, said that he really felt that that the safety was obviously better posteriorly. It was no question, and he was waiting on more biomechanical data and more outcomes. And Dawood's worked hard on some outcome data. I'm asking both, based on the biomechanics you just presented, is there any reason why a posterior approach wouldn't be optimal considering the improved safety? So Corey, you want to take that first, and we'll go over to Jeff to get the final word?
Sure. I mean, from what we were taught, the going up the algorithm from least invasive to most invasive. I mean, as Jeff just mentioned, I mean, like 3 is inherently more is more invasive, but just the concept of you're taking 3 devices that are the size of a pinky finger, and you're jamming it through both joints. So, or you're jamming it through both surfaces. So you should be trying the simpler one. First, it's just a question, it's like doing an epidural before you do something more invasive. So there's no reason not to do this first.
And actually, if you could just pull up my last slide, and I'll just use that as my answer. I think it was just there a minute ago. Go forward one more. Yeah. So bottom line, that was kind of the way I looked at it. I said, in the end, this system optimizes the likelihood of fusion. It's proven to be biomechanically as good or probably better than what we'll call the gold standard lateral system. It does transfix the joint, but in a much less risky way, and there's no piercing needed. So some other companies like to hide behind that concept of, well, the word means pierce, so if you're not piercing the joint, you didn't do your job. I think here's a perfect example that, no, you did the job, you did it better, and good news, you didn't have to pierce anything. So The clinical data is also bearing out. So I think in the end of the day, my last sentence, and it's a little bit of a smart ass sentence, but I'll say it anyway, you know, proven biomechanics and clinical data, in my opinion, are probably more important to a patient than debates over Latin etymologic definitions. And I hate to see a company hiding behind that stuff. That's the stuff that lawyers do. We're doctors and we need to be better than that. So anyway, I said here, I hope that during this talk, the audience was transfixed. And there's a little play on words because I certainly hope you weren't pierced. So anyway, that's my view of the world.
Gentlemen, we'll see you both in Miami, hopefully this summer, and a phenomenal job. So thank you both.
Fantastic jobs. Enjoy the slopes, Jeff and Corey. Have a good luck on the next debate.
Thank you.
So that wasn't much of a debate, though. They both agreed with each other a lot, but it was very interesting, I think. And certainly, I think to see the evolution of less invasive things, getting great data and great biomechanics. So let's go to the next debate. I think it's another one that really is kind of interesting to me. I'll have David Lee and Corey join me, Corey again and David Lee. And David, I'm going to give you the first comments in this debate. You know, dorsal ganglion stimulation, I think I did the first case in 2008, and now here we are in 2022. It's become much more common, but there's a lot of debate on how much skill it takes. So I'm going to give you the floor on, does it take more skill than a normal spinal cord stimulator, or the same and more practice? And you get the first comments on that, my friend.
Yeah, sure. Initially, when I was presented with this debate, I took the enviable task of trying to argue the probably one that most people think is opposite of the common sense, which is, you know, that DRG requires essentially a similar skill set level as SCS. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here with the assumption that Dr. Hunter is thinking the opposite. And having been in a situation now with you, Tim, and with Corey, that teaching this stuff, I think the argument isn't that there's differences. Obviously, there's no denying that. The tools that we use for DRG are unique. I think elegantly designed to the point where you're using a curved tip introducer to place the lead, which is you know, infinitely smaller than a traditional dorsal column lead, into a tight space. And so, so like with any new intervention, it's not that it's the argument that there isn't additional training that's necessary. We all know that. But I would say that the differences are probably not as wide as most people make them out to be. So differences, I just pointed out. Now let's talk about similarities. So first of all, we're still accessing the epidural space. We're still accessing it at the midline. We are coming contralaterally, but essentially the tools, even though they have differences, are the same. There's an introducer, there's a lead, there's both implantable, non-implantable versions. There's, you know, the trial version. There's an IPG, a tunneler, anchors. So the tools at their crux are essentially the same. Going it one step further, it's the neuroanatomy understanding that is the most essential part of this. So if you're a interventional spine pain, you know, ACGME accredited, you know, pain fellow trained coming out, we know our neuroanatomy well. Obviously, we are additionally being trained in these, you know, conferences and these labs. ASPN is doing a big part of that. So if you know your neuroanatomy, I would argue that essentially doing a DRG case should be relatively straightforward. You have to plan a little bit ahead. You have to plan additionally, of course, than a dorsal column stimulator. But the central canal is continuous with the neural foramen and vice versa. So as long as you know what you're doing and you know your neuroanatomy well, the chances of some, you know, large complication or you know, sequelae occurring is going to be infinitely lower. I don't know if I ran out of time there.
No, great arguments, David. Corey, let's hear your side of that debate.
So yeah, there are obvious parallels to you know, between this and spinal cord stimulation, but it is inherently very different. So with spinal cord stimulation, you're going in just one axis. You're going on the y-axis, north-south, and you're trying to reduce the amount that it goes from left to right. With DRG, not only are you moving the x-axis, the y-axis, but you're also moving in the z-axis. You're moving 3 dimensions, and I think that's where it gets people tied up. So skill can come in many forms. Skill can be just, you know, something that you're inherently, you know, you're just better with your hands, and things that, you know, the 10,000 hour rule, you get better over time. I would say DRG probably is a little bit of both, mostly experience. So I think the skill kind of comes in the fact that you're more patient. So with spinal cord stimulation, you know, you teach it, people will have, you know, crappy lead or crappy like needle entry point, but they'll still fight the good fight, and eventually the lead will go straight up. With DRG, that's not the case. You have to be more patient. You have to be more, more of a perfectionist in a way. And just, we know that it takes more skill because we've seen, some of the difficulty with getting it to commercialization, was around, not every doctor was capable of doing it. So it was just, we were purposely going after doctors to train them, the ones that were doing the implants, because there was more skill with that. And, also because, not everybody in the community was going to be able to implant this the way they, could just send off a typical stimulator. So yeah, there's obvious, you're the very basic, you're getting epidural access like a regular epidural, just for a regular dorsal column stimulator. But there's so many more differences in it. Instead of, putting in a needle and then putting in a lead, you're putting in a needle with an introducer with a lead. So instead of just trying to go up and down, like I said, you're actually trying to go up and out of foramen, where the worst thing you would see going north-south would maybe be a small adhesion or like a stenotic central canal. You can have like 30 more things that come at you and just may not even be able to get out the foramen. So it does certainly take more skill, but I think more than that, it takes more patience and elegance.
Nicely done by you both. Dr. Lee, you got a rebuttal on that, and then we'll go back to Dr. Hunter for the final rebuttal.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to argue with Corey there. I know he's got a huge fund of experience. I can't say I necessarily disagree with any of those statements that he's made. I will say that we still use the same exact, angles and fluoroscopic views to do dorsal column versus, the DRG implantation. In fact, we probably rely more on contralateral obliques more so in that case. Those are pretty much typical imaging that we learn in our fellowships these days, and we weren't previously using contralateral obliques as much. I go one step further really quickly is to just say that numbers don't lie. So if you look at a lot of pooled analysis papers that were obviously written by Dr. Hunter, Dr. Deere, Dr. Said, and you can see that the complications rates were 3.2% relative to 3.1% with dorsal column stimulators. So I know that it's a more challenging of cases, but the numbers show that essentially complication rates are about the same. So I'd argue that really not as terrible of a difference, again, that we're making it out to be.
So Dr. Hunter, Dr. Lee used our own papers against you. So we get the final rebuttal, but that's pretty powerful debating skill.
So there's no one saying that the device is not it's very elegant in the way it functions. So that's why the complications are low with it. Because people like, Tim and Rob and a lot of other people that developed a system kind of thought through those processes and made it as slick and as functional as it is. So while it does take more, while there's less complication rates, that's just because the people that are putting it in have more skill. So that's why there's less complications.
All right, gentlemen, that was a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. I'll have Dawood join me back for the next debate. And thank you both. I don't know who won that one. I can't really make an opinion.
No, great job, Corey. Great job.
I have to give it to Hunter on that one.
You're giving that one to Hunter. Okay, so Hunter wins that one. I think Hunter's Todd won and won one. So according to your assessment, that's pretty good. If Kansas does that well, you'll be out of the tournament though.
Yeah, no, I'm recommending they got a little tough game with Providence. So next we'll have Dr. Malinowski and Dr. Weisbaum talk to us about the new CDC Opioid Draft Guidelines. So these have been a little bit controversial as they've come out. Some people think they're an improvement. And others may think this is really kind of a step backwards in the wrong direction. We know kind of the implications of the original CDC guidelines that came out, I think about five years ago or so. I think it impacted all of our practices pretty dramatically, I'd have to say, at least where I practice. The reverberations from it happened almost instantly. Whether that's what they were intended to do or not, that was the reality. So now there's been some stakeholders that have been able to weigh in on new CDC opioid draft guidelines. So I'm going to have Jackie start off and say why these are potentially an improvement from where we were with the original guidelines.
Thank you so much, Dawood. So, it's really interesting. I think there's parts of it that are probably a little bit of an improvement. I think one of the hardest things is that when we look at the original guidelines that came out, there were some numbers, and a lot of states and physicians adopted those numbers as thresholds that were hard and fast and immutable. And that was really detrimental for a lot of our patients, because there are plenty of patients who have undergone multiple interventions, surgeries, and things like that, and still do well on a low dose of opiates. And previously, there were limitations on the amount of days you could administer them. So it was like 3 days was average, 7 days was the max, and after that, nobody needs that. But realistically, being in chronic pain, I think we all get to see these patients who have tried and failed everything, and they do well with opiates, and we have the ways to administer them safely with pumps and other things like that, but there's still issues. Now, I think the reality is that where this version is improved is that it kind of removed those guidelines as being so specific and allows there to be a little bit more physician thought behind those guidelines. And so I think that gives people more opportunity to have access to medications that can be beneficial, and hopefully they're done safely with these guidelines. And I think it also hopefully encourage people to reach for the non-opiate suggestions that are indicated in the guidelines more frequently, and maybe encourage a lot of our primary care and other colleagues who are starting these patients on opiates to refer them earlier, rather than kind of dumping these patients when they've already been well established on opiates after many years into a pain practice and say, okay, like now you deal with it. So my hope is that it's going to be an improvement. But again, I could go either way on this.
Very, very nice summary, Jackie. We kind of put you in a little bit of a challenging situation there. So very nice standpoint there. So Dr. Malinowski, you were pretty amped up when these draft guidelines came up. I think you sent a text to me and Dr. Deere almost immediately when these are posted, and saying you had a little bit of an issue with the draft guidelines. So I'm going to have you take the viewpoint of a step back. You've done some really great work within our society. We've posted some pretty comprehensive comments on the national website. So Mark, why are these a step back?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. So largely speaking, these documents that are considered guidelines are really politically motivated. I personally believe that there was an agenda behind this, and you can read this throughout the document. The average physician is not, over the years, is not necessarily skilled at really critically analyzing these data points that they make inside the document itself. It's really subject to misinterpretation by the readers, who really aren't used to critically thinking through these. They also have, physicians have a larger problem when it comes to coming up with solutions to some of these more complicated problems, such as opioid abuse. And this provides fodder for these physicians to actually march through this document like they're hard and fast rules, rather than just generalized guidelines. They called them guidelines in 2016, and all of these guidelines magically turned into revised code in many state legislatures. So ultimately, these guidelines were formed by a working group that didn't represent pain management physicians. There were very little physicians that were truly in the field and in the trenches, actually understanding what's going on locally. The whole document was mesmerizing in the sense that it just meandered its way back and forth between introduction and then delivery of data points, but the data points weren't cited. The document really contradicted itself in certain capacities. It was really written in such a way that ultimately the readers are hypnotized in what their final conclusions are, which, by the way, were very much common sense and what has been pushed over the last 10 years anyway. So they recreated the wheel. And I found it very interesting that they went out of their way to demonstrate that these documents are not meant to be taken literally and as hard and fast rules, and not to be applied by, I believe in the introduction, or excuse me, in the abstract lines 83 to 87, they said something about they shouldn't be applied as inflexible standards of care by health systems, state and local and federal agencies and boards and governing bodies. But yet they had over 15 or more citations from the CDC, from the AHRQ, and other government bodies, not to mention the fodder that was in here from special interest groups as well. So this is very much a political document masquerading as guidelines, proper guidelines for patient care.
Don't know who won the debate so far, but Mark, you won the passion debate here. I really love your passion here. I have a question for both of you, during just a 30-second answer, if you could. Dr. Weissman, one of my questions for you is, when you read these guidelines, and you were part of the executive committee response to the guideline, but it seemed like that the people writing them had never heard of interventional pain or interventional procedures for the treatment of pain. What did you think about them neglecting really the whole area of evidence, which is quite strong in our area of interest, helping people with adding procedures as part of the multimodal therapy?
Sure. So I actually think there was a lot of damage with that regard. And unfortunately, I didn't get to talk about that aspect of it because I was supposed to be, this is great. But the reality is there was a real lack of the interventional pain physicians say in these guidelines. And moreover, it actually really limits us on the amount of interventional things that we can offer, including but not limited to epidurals and things like that, RFA, PNS, SCS. And basically say that's only got enough evidence limited for these procedures for like rare or serious patients who have been, so it really limits our ability to get access for these non-opiate therapies to these patients. So I think that is a huge step backwards, and that's something that's consistently been an issue for pain management.
Well, I love you have your dog with you right now. It's great to have both of mine here.
I'm sorry.
So that's great. Mark, I ask you a question. It's a little bit two-sided. One is, I think that CDC guidelines in 16 had some good things, that we had a real problem in Appalachia, most of America, with opioids, but it also led to some bad things, maybe some forced rapid reductions in people who weren't treated properly. So it was mixed. But here's my question for you, and it's a complicated political question. You call this political document. You lecture and teach, become a key opinion leader for companies, and you're transparent about those relationships as part of your collaboration, which built this field, the collaboration between industry and physicians. There's people that write those guidelines who have great collaborations with insurance companies and workers' comp companies and make millions of dollars. I don't ever see any transparency on those consulting things when they go out and write papers like this and deny other things. What's your thoughts on transparency on those who work with insurance partners? Shouldn't there be transparency there as well?
100%. These documents are used to deny patient service. I mean, there's no question. You can find citations from all of these guidelines, and some of the authors on this document in particular cite themselves over and over again, recycling information and creating this misinformation campaign. And there is very much a point of view that has a certain narrative that's being put out there in order to, put guardrails on the latitude of options that we really do have in reality. So I agree with Dr. Weissbein in that there's no incentive for very effective therapies to be touted in this particular document. And that speaks to the transparency on one side that we have, but not necessarily on the insurance side. And let me just go ahead and point out that these documents are created with public funds, and these public funds are delegated by certain governmental officials. So a research institute has a large incentive to toe the party line because they get maybe tens of thousands of dollars to write these guidelines. So they recycle many guidelines over many periods of time. I mean, honestly, it's really perplexing, especially when epidemiology people are not necessarily entrenched in the field, aside from maybe belonging to an organization and loosely stating so. I mean, why not I just go ahead, since I'm certified in CPR, I'm just going to go ahead and write new guidelines on open heart surgery. Maybe I'll start that next year. That sounds like a good next step for me, and maybe I can get some funds to do so.
Very nice, you two. I think we put Jackie in a difficult situation there, so I'm gonna have to give Mark the win on that one, because I think we're all kind of uniformly agreed that those draft guidelines had some pretty erroneous omissions. So nice job.
I'll take the loss on that for sure. So I mean, I totally, that was the sucky position.
Great job, Jackie.
Good job.
All right, we're going. The next debate, we're right on time. I think we have 2 more debates left, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So let's jump into our next one. If we could have our next 2 debaters onto the stage. Dr. Dickerson out of Chicago, good evening. And Dr. Jay Shaw out of New York City / New Jersey. Welcome, gentlemen. So our next This is something, I kind of wanted to talk about this because, as being part of a fellowship program, I have fellows that graduate, every year, and and one of my fellows actually joined Dr. Dickerson last year. And they're always kind of, fellows that kind of practice these days really want to do modern, cutting edge interventional therapies. I find that that's really more of their motivation for a job these days than, money and prestige and those kind of things. Like, I want to go somewhere where I'm going to have the ability to do things like DRG and minimally invasive spine therapy. So really, I wanted to have you both talk about, because you guys both have done it successfully in two very different types of worlds. Dr. Dickerson in a large health system, and Dr. Jay Shaw kind of starting from scratch, his own private practice. So I'm going to let David kind of take the floor and say why practicing in a health system is advantageous for someone that wants to practice modern interventional pain.
Thank you, Dr. Sayed, Dr. Deere, Dr. Shaw, good to join you. Nice to see you. So I just think that to deny the role that integrated health systems are having in the pain care delivery system is you're behind the times. Integrated health systems, whether you're a thriving private practice or a part of a networked group of private practices, or a single standing hospital. The integrated health systems that are thriving right now came together to create competitive strategies for payers, for value-based care, and to create contracts that made it so that really there was a squeeze on everybody to do a better job, or more importantly, do it the way that the insurance companies wanted them to. These integrated health systems were collectively are able to bargain as an entity on your behalf as a member of their medical group or faculty. And it does take a little bit of the stress out of how you get to insert yourself into a community. That said, you have to understand the identity of your community and whether or not they believe that that health system is the place they want to take their family and friends. So when you're looking at this, you have to look at from all the stakeholders' standpoint as to who you're going to be going and working with. But if you can find integrated health systems that are putting patients first, that are bringing in hardworking, progressive clinicians in the pain world, and that have promoted a transparent, ceilingless approach to helping us do what's right for patients, and also be engaged in research and education, that to me is a very safe place to be for the indefinite future. That said, you never stop negotiating, and you really have to make sure that you have someone who's been at that table constantly negotiating to make sure that you are getting those things that either being promised to you as a new recruit, or you're promising yourself and your group every day as you keep showing up to work and doing the right thing for patients.
Great answer, Dr. Dickerson. Right on time, I must say. That's pretty impressive. Right at the clock hit 0 with the buzzer beater. So, Dr. Shaw, you practice in New York City, New Jersey area. You practice at a very fine academic medical institution, did your fellowship at Cornell Medical Center. You've had some opportunity to stay in big health systems, but you decided to go out on your own in private practice. What motivated you to do that, and what have been some of the advantages?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. This is a great debate as well. David, that was a great answer, and I completely agree with integrative health, continuity of care, multifactorial care, comprehensive care. That's a huge facet in any community. I think one of the biggest motivators for me, and one of the biggest draws, for like a fellow going into private practice, is times have changed. Patient expectations have changed. And God knows over the last 5 years, and certainly 10 years, the patient experience as it regards to interventional high quality care has also changed. The resources and technology have also rapidly evolved, where someone in a smaller or larger group practice can actually readily compete with a large healthcare system. I will say one of the biggest advantages to being in private practice as it pertains to interventional spine and pain care and musculoskeletal care is that, for the most part, the people who are making day-to-day decisions in terms of allocation of resources, budgets, where to spend money to really protect patients, are the same people who are face-to-face with patients every day. There's less of a bureaucracy, there's less administrative red tape, and you really can spend your time with patients and allocate your resources in terms of any procedures that you'd like to do. There's no turf battles with any other facets of the hospital, and most of these things are done safely. And I'll also add that for someone who's a fellow who's coming out and is interested in things like evidence-based medicine and research, that's also readily available nowadays, with the procurement of proprietary software and other things that we utilize in private practice to track our own outcomes and publish these things. So I really think that in terms of the future, one of the most interesting things that I'll say here in the last 20 seconds is one of the biggest things you're seeing across the country is healthcare systems are at a rapid pace acquiring things like outpatient-based clinics, surgery centers. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that healthcare systems are gravitating more towards a known private practice model rather than the other way around. That's kind of my take on that.
So, gentlemen, let me ask you a question. I think this, this debate's great. I'm in kind of a mixed model, so as you both of you know, I kind of do both of what you do. But is there here's my question. It's a hard one. We have a lot of fellows. We'll probably have over 1,000 people watching this debate before it's over. We're both live and on our website. Here's the question for you. Is there a personality that when you meet that person, you say belongs over here or belongs over there? Can you tell when you meet a fellow if they would fit in better with Jay's model or David's model? Or is it hard to tell until you get into the real world? What do you think, Dave? Why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I think that fit, I'll throw this out. I think I spend a little bit of every day asking myself why I don't have my own practice. And that's a real measure but I continue to show up and be really excited about my own destiny, right? And I think that it speaks to the fact that there isn't a one size fits all approach. You might find a private practice that has all of the sins of academia, and you might have a large health system that is streamlined and efficient and is faster than any ASC at turning rooms, getting the right pre-auths, and making sure that you're able to do a great job for your patients and deliver that personalized service. So when I think about fellows seeking this out, how to ask the right questions and present yourself is really important. And that's where your mentors and your sponsors connecting with those of us that are hiring is a very valuable way for us to get to know who you are, because those people have watched you. And my rule of thumb is I don't hire anyone until they're about 60 to 70% of the way through their fellowship, because I want that exposure and experience to come to me in the form of a reference from people who've watched your work.
Jay, what's the personality that would fit in your model? I mean, you came to visit me when you were just starting, and you've done really well. What personality would fit in well to go out and start their own practice and take that big risk?
Well, generally speaking, I mean, you have the same quality. You have certain qualities. Hardworking, persistent individual, someone who clearly wants to make a difference and stand on their own 2 feet, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing, though, I think, is what is going to translate into the best patient care. What's your personality like, and where are you going to step in every single day for the next 10, 20, 30 years and be happy? Because if you could be in private practice and financially you might feel like you're doing well, but if you're miserable working all those hours, that's going to translate into poor patient care and vice versa. So I really think it really comes down to what type of person you are in terms of what fit is the best for you. But really, whatever that best fit is, it really should translate into patients being the winner.
Great answers. Dawood, final words on this debate?
No, I think this is definitely a tie. I think both gentlemen bring some really valid points, and it's a struggle that we all are faced with, and hopefully those of people that are on the fence out there, especially our fellows, got some insight. I'm sure Dr. Dickerson and Dr. Shah are happy to have you reach out to him individually about any questions or comments, or maybe even job opportunities.
David and Jay, thank you so much. We'll go now to our last debate. You guys did a great job. Our last, the final game, the final debate. We're going to finish up on time after that. We have Dr. Reese joining us, as well as Dr. Weissman joining us again. And the question becomes, David, I'm going to frame the question. I'm going to have you go first, and then Dr. Weissman will give her response and her thoughts. Today, I had a patient who had a problem in the spine. And I had 3 minimally invasive procedures that all seem appropriate based on what's, could be approved by insurance for the patient. So obviously I have to make a decision on my method. So when you have someone, for example, who has spinal stenosis, and I'm gonna come back and ask Dr. Weissman a question a little bit different in a moment. How do you decide when to go to a minimally invasive lumbar decompression, when to go to a posterior fixation arthrodesis, when to go to an intraspinous spacer? How do you make those decisions?
Great, and thanks everybody for letting me join this conversation. Excited to be here with debating with Jackie. To answer your question, I think it starts with, again, the right diagnosis, and we all know back pain can be extremely complicated. Deciphering whether this is predominantly radicular or axial components from the facet or vertebrogenic, the newer terms out there. And so when we look at the options for minimally invasive spine with spinal stenosis, I still think there's a role for epidurals, in partial diagnosis. We want to make sure that they have the right they fit the right demographic and the right classic symptoms for treatment with a procedure like interspinous fixation or interspinous spacers. And so my usual rationale is if they have failed diminishing returns with epidurals, usually a series of 2 or 3 over the course of 6 months, and they have the classic signs of claudication, then I'm certainly now reaching to this a little bit earlier in the algorithm. Certainly, we don't want to push them over the edge straight to a surgeon, and they end up with a extensive posterior fusion or T-lift, and then they're unhappy and they end up with residual axial low back pain when we can be treating this a little much more minimally invasively. With regards to SI joint fixation, I think Dr. Hunter and Dr. Syed, you've made up great points on the biomechanics. And so when we talk about treatments for SI joint fixation, sacroiliac joint injections, we all know that they help, but more of a band-aid when the actual problem is a lot of that motion, aberrant motion in the joint that shouldn't be there. And so if we can offer our patients an actual fix to this problem, then they're going to be much better off, in the long run. The other options include radiofrequency ablation. I think we all know that that's extremely time-consuming. The lateral branch ablations, it's extremely uncomfortable for the patient. And there's again that idea of diminishing returns, and are we really providing a potential solution for that motion that's going on at the joint?
All great thoughts. I think everything you said, I would certainly agree with. Dr. Weissman, here's your question, and I think it's a really evolving question. And I think earlier tonight I mentioned Dr. Orfanos, a neurosurgeon I work closely with here in West Virginia. Him and his partners, all great doctors. We have a great relationship, great collaboration, and we don't have a problem deciding when I should do something less invasive versus the larger surgeries. What do you think the best model is to create that collaboration with the neurosurgeons, orthopedic spine surgeons out there, and the interventional pain physicians? How can we create that model in these algorithms?
Sure. So, I mean, I work in an orthopedic group, and one of my partners is an orthopedic spine surgeon. And so as these things come down the pipeline or gain traction, realistically, the way we've navigated that in our practice, because obviously we share a lot of patients together, is, he and I powwow and talk about like, well, how do we feel about this? What is this going to mean for our patient population? Are there patients absolutely that you think this is an appropriate for, and why? And then if he has an issue with something, I want to know why he has an issue. So what's his perception of there being an issue with this procedure versus this procedure, so that we can kind of get to the bottom of it and do the right thing for the patient. I would say that I think as a pain physician, many of us get excited about a new toy that comes on the market. So I try and be judicious about the application of a new device. And sometimes, I may do like 5 of them and then say, I'm not really ready to adapt this yet. I want to see some more data. Or it's something that, everybody does well. But I think the reality is that without that data, it can be really difficult to present to our surgical colleagues and justify why there's a benefit. And so I'm really excited that so many of these new devices and things that are coming out, fixation devices, are really looking into making registries and doing these trials, because I think being able to support the efficacy of these things makes it a lot more palatable for people to digest, and then, feel comfortable utilizing it in their treatment algorithm as well. Not every patient can have a major intervention because of their medical comorbidities, or they just aren't indicated for that. And to be perfectly honest, I would say, it's really beneficial that, having an open dialogue with your surgical colleagues, because you're going to want someone who can help you when you have a patient that needs surgery, and vice versa. You're going to be referring patients back and forth. So being able to support why you do something and asking why they don't want you to do something is, I think, a really big conversation starter.
Really nice work, you two. I have one final question for both of you. I've had, certainly Dr. Deere has done a lot of work with establishing algorithms like the MIST guidelines, and Dr. Falowski, myself, and a few others did a little SI joint algorithm as well. I've heard some criticism of algorithms from some folks that say they're too cookbook, they're not very patient-centric. What is your guys' rebuttal, or do you agree with that, that algorithms sometimes kind of take some of the art out of medicine? I'll let David start and then Jackie weigh in on that.
Yeah, so cookbook medicine is one thing. When you go in and you're literally have a set, this is what we're doing. We're going to do 3, back in the day, we do a series of 3 epidurals, and if they fail that, then you're jumping to, maybe a facet ablation and whatever else. But I think an algorithm is important such that, that we keep everything that is a potential option for these patients on the table, and that we are constantly re-looking and re-evaluating each of those options with evidence-based medicine. And so I don't think it's cookie cutter medicine at all if we're actually, using these strategically.
Jackie, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that the reality is that having an algorithm can be both beneficial and also can be dangerous. So if you are really regimented about following an algorithm and don't recognize, like Dave was saying, that there's going to be patients that you need to go outside of the algorithm or treat differently, that can be damaging, because again, falling back into the 3 epidurals and things like that. But I know that many of our colleagues kind of create some of these algorithms as starting points for a lot of our PA and MP colleagues and advanced practitioners who may not have the breadth of training that a lot of us who have already gone through anesthesia, PM&R, neuro residencies, and then fellowships get that extensive training. So being able to kind of have a little bit of a pathway that they can ask questions about, I think can be helpful for all of these therapies to get access, because not every doctor is able to see every patient every day. So how do you instruct your team members without having kind of like a plan of attack to start with?
Delwood, I loved your question, and I love the answer both of you gave, but I'm just going to really say one thing about that. That's the final question to both of you, 30-second question. Algorithms are made because people don't have a plan and they go into crazy ways. And so I think algorithms are critical. I think the thing both of you said so right, though, is you don't have to follow the algorithm. The algorithm is a guidebook for you, but you look at the patient individually and you adapt the algorithm based on the patient. So you both said that. I think you're both right. So someone who follows an algorithm blindly would have to be somewhat of a poor doctor. So I think that is that side of things. Here's the last question for you. I talked about this before when I was in med school. These stents that just came out, and the heart surgeons were saying these stents are so dangerous. You can't fix it if they get the need a bypass emergently. And of course, we all know what happened. There's a lot less bypasses, and the mortality and morbidities improved dramatically. If we look at the current setting where heart bypass is rare but does occur, and we look at the analogy to where we are today with minimally invasive procedures we're doing, do you think the neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons will be heading our direction, and then we're all going to meet kind of in the stent world, if you will? How far along that journey are we to the minimally invasive journey? I'll go with you first, Jackie, and then David will give you the final word on that.
I think that we're further than we think. I know when I was approached by some of our colleagues about some of these fusion devices that are currently on the market. When I approached my spine surgeon, he was like, yeah, there's like 70 of these devices on the market that have already been out there in some shape or form. So I think it's kind of an evolution. And I think exactly what you're saying, we're meeting in the middle and trying to figure out like, where is there a utilization? But the reality is that if we look at everything, it's not just stents, it's TAVRs. What we realize is that things that we originally invented in healthcare to help patients who maybe had really significant comorbidities and couldn't have bigger procedures, the reality is we recognize that even patients who are healthy might not need a giant procedure to correct a deformity or an issue. So I think the future is minimally invasive, and I think that embracing that and figuring out what that mix becomes is going to get closer and closer, because the days of extensive fusions may not be long lasting unless it's really for a deformity correction. And I'm happy about that, because eventually those patients end up having like 6, 7, 8 surgeries, and then they're in our office, and you're like, okay, where's an area that hasn't been de-roofed to put a stim? So I think that it needs to go in that direction, and that overlap needs to be married really by us, again, having data and interacting with our surgical colleagues consistently to show that we can all do this together and help each other.
Great thoughts. David, final word.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Jackie. I think, again, minimally invasive spine's here. It's here to stay. It's only innovation is going to continue to develop, in this space, and it's only going to be fostered by collaboration with our surgical colleagues. I think the one thing that we know about the surgeons and neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons is they want good outcomes. Most of them just as much as we do, and they don't want to treat or fuse somebody. Most of them, unless they're in it for the money, and have a bad outcome on their record. And a lot of them have hopefully a good background, and they're looking to treat their patients and have a good track record with their patients. patients. And so sharing those patients with us who have been trained in these procedures, proficiently doing these procedures and doing them professionally and in timely fashion and minimally invasively, I think they're all going to do better. We're all going to be better off. These patients are going to be better off, and the science will be better off. And I think we're the group to drive the innovation and the research on this, as this has been around for a while, the fusion, and we haven't seen as much data as we're putting out in our minimally invasive spine space.
Really nicely done, you two. Thanks for your viewpoints tonight, and thanks for your time.
Great job. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Dawood, let's wrap it up. We got a few things to talk about. We have about 4 minutes to go to be on time. I'll let you go with the first announcements and your final thoughts, and then I'll close.
Yeah, so we just had a really successful think tank in Nashville last weekend. A lot of great research and innovative stuff was presented, and we had a lot of friends come and join us there. But we're really now gearing up for our annual meeting in July, kind of our keystone event. So a really big push this year, and I think Tim will agree, is that we really want to focus on really high level science. Obviously we've had really great discussions with key opinion leaders across the world in the meeting the last few years, but really we're going to have a bigger emphasis on original research. So how that really needs to start is with people presenting and submitting their poster abstracts. So we have a submission deadline of April 15th, 2022. We're going to try to stick to that. We're going to have some opportunities for late breaking research as well. So I think, for those of you that have really high impact projects, research, manuscripts, please submit those, and we'll try to highlight those in our meeting this year. Tim?
I just want to say I had a scan on that, and the beautiful Kazra Almadelfon has a video and an abstract portal creation. If you scan that little thing on the screen right now. And again, as you said, Dawood, we're going to have a commitment to science like never before. We're going to have, between every panel, we're going to have some keynote plenary presentations of research, 6 to 8 minute presentations of people's work, and there'll be a room for a lot of those to be presented. So it's a chance for you to get on the podium, those of you who've been doing posters in the past. So I think it's going to be a great opportunity. I think you have another announcement to make before your final thoughts.
Yeah, no, but again, just to kind of reemphasize, the annual meeting will be July 14th through the 17th in the Lowe's Miami Beach Hotel. We're going to have the whole hotel to ourselves this year, so it should be a really, really great time. Hope everyone can meet us out there. We'll have a lot more information. We'll have agendas hopefully published with the content sometime in mid-April for those of you. So hopefully people can start registering, and we'll see you there. Usually the rooms fill up pretty darn quick, so you don't have to be staying 3 blocks away as a lot of people had to last year. So get your rooms now if you want to be in our block. So
no, that's good advice. And just to say, people always ask me how they can get more involved, how they can get like Mark Malinowski with his advocacy, all the things people are doing, all the committees, and things were like the best practices committee just started. And the answer is, you have to show up and be present and really network with your colleagues, and that's how you can do it. So this is a great time to do that. So hope you can join us there and really share both science but also friendship. And I think that's the support we give each other is so critical to all of our success, both medicine but also in mental health, to be here for each other. So your final thoughts of tonight's debate, Dawood?
No, I think it was great. We hit a lot of important topics in an hour there. We went all the way from, neuromodulation, minimally invasive spine, sacroiliac joint strategies, and, CDC guidelines. So we kind of hit a lot of topics. I think it was a pretty efficient hour, if I could say so myself. So thanks for everyone for tuning in, and we hope to see you for the next one. Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And I think you'll agree with me. We had some really smart people tonight on here talking about their thoughts. And I think we just want to keep sharing information with each other. So God bless everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Rock, Jock, Jayhawk.